North Korea's involvement in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia has escalated concerns on a global scale, leading to speculations about the potential for World War III. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, made alarming claims during a one-day summit with European Union leaders in Brussels. He not only presented his victory plan, aimed at securing a resolution to the ongoing war, but also sounded an alarm regarding North Korea's military support for Russia. According to Zelensky, Ukrainian intelligence services have discovered that around 10,000 North Korean troops are being trained to join Russian forces in Ukraine. This is a substantial development, signaling a further intensification of the war and involving new international players, thus broadening the scope of the conflict. Zelensky emphasized the gravity of this situation by declaring it as the first step to a world war. The involvement of North Korea, he argued, is not simply a matter of transferring weapons or military technology, but is now directly about sending troops to the battlefield. This escalates the nature of the conflict and adds a new layer of complexity to the already volatile geopolitical dynamics in Eastern Europe. The Ukrainian president's statement suggests that Russia is attempting to avoid domestic social unrest by outsourcing military manpower from countries like North Korea, rather than enforcing greater mobilization of its own citizens. This approach points to a shift in the war's progression, where foreign forces are being drawn in to sustain the momentum of the conflict. While the Kremlin has publicly dismissed reports of North Korean involvement, the presence of North Korean officers on Ukrainian soil, as suggested by Zelensky, is a powerful symbol of the deepening alliance between Russia and North Korea. The Ukrainian government has previously voiced concerns over Russia's alliances with other nations, particularly Iran. Iranian-made kamikaze drones have already played a significant role in Russian military strategy, used extensively for long-range strikes on Ukrainian targets. However, the dispatch of troops, rather than drones or military equipment, marks a significant escalation. It indicates that Russia is seeking to bolster its forces not just with technology, but with human resources from other nations, which could have a ripple effect on global security. This partnership, along with Russia's already established alliance with Tehran, paints a troubling picture of the alliances forming in support of Russia's war efforts. For Zelensky, the addition of North Korean troops is a clear signal that this conflict is no longer just about Ukraine and Russia, but could lead to wider involvement from other global powers, pushing the world closer to a broader, potentially catastrophic war. In response to this growing threat, Zelensky reiterated the necessity of continued support from Western nations, particularly in terms of military aid and strategic alliances. During his discussions with European Union leaders, he outlined his victory plan, which calls for a combination of military and diplomatic efforts aimed at securing Ukraine's future and ending the war by the following year. The central theme of this plan is an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO, a move that Zelensky sees as essential for securing the country's sovereignty and deterring further aggression from Russia. However, joining NATO is not a simple or immediate solution. The decision would require the approval of all 32 NATO allies, including the United States. The complexity of this process is further complicated by the political landscape, particularly the outcome of upcoming U.S. presidential elections, which could alter the course of U.S. foreign policy. Zelensky's plea for NATO membership is rooted in his belief that Ukraine's victory on the battlefield is intertwined with securing a long-term strategic security umbrella. He argues that only through a strong alliance with NATO can Ukraine hope to rebuild after the war and fend off future threats from Russia. The prospect of NATO membership is one of two potential paths Zelensky sees for ending the conflict, the other being the acquisition of nuclear weapons. The latter option, while drastic, is presented as a potential deterrent against Russian aggression, though it comes with its own set of moral and political challenges. While NATO has remained non-committal about Ukraine's membership, the alliance continues to provide military aid and support. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has emphasized the importance of keeping Ukraine in a strong negotiating position, although he stopped short of promising immediate membership. Zelensky, for his part, is keen to ensure that Ukraine is not just seen as a pawn in the geopolitical game, but as a legitimate sovereign state with its own future to secure. His call for stronger air defense systems and access to a broader range of intelligence from Western allies highlights his strategic focus on building Ukraine's capacity to defend itself both during and after the conflict. The involvement of North Korean troops could further complicate Ukraine's chances of securing NATO membership. The addition of foreign fighters on the battlefield may be seen by some NATO members as an escalation that could provoke a direct conflict with Russia, a situation that many European nations are keen to avoid. The delicate balance of power within NATO means that any decision to admit Ukraine must be carefully considered, particularly in light of the potential consequences for broader global security. Zelensky's vision for Ukraine's future is heavily reliant on the idea that joining NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, would serve as a strong and symbolic response to Russia, particularly to President Vladimir Putin's aggressive actions in Ukraine. By becoming a NATO member, Ukraine would signal to Russia and the world that it is backed by powerful allies and that any further attempts by Russia to undermine Ukraine's sovereignty would not be tolerated by the international community. Essentially, NATO membership would reaffirm Ukraine's right to self-determination, meaning Ukraine would have the power to make its own decisions about its political status and alliances, free from external coercion. However, joining NATO is not an easy process for Ukraine. One of the key challenges is that NATO operates on a consensus basis, meaning that all 32 current member countries must agree before a new country can join. This includes major powers like the United States, which play a pivotal role in NATO decisions. The political landscape in these member countries, particularly in the US and Europe, can be complex and changeable. For example, the upcoming US presidential election could shift the country's foreign policy, potentially affecting Ukraine's chances of getting the backing it needs. In Europe, there may be varying opinions among NATO members about the risks of admitting Ukraine, especially given the ongoing war with Russia. Some nations may fear that Ukraine's membership could provoke further military conflict with Russia or even escalate into a broader international war. This makes securing unanimous approval from all NATO members a difficult and uncertain process. While Zelensky is pushing for membership as a way to secure Ukraine's future and send a clear message to Russia, the political realities in NATO countries make it hard to predict when or if Ukraine will be able to join. The timing of Zelensky's claims about North Korean involvement is critical. With the conflict in Ukraine showing no signs of abating, and with Russian forces continuing to press their advantage in certain regions, the introduction of foreign troops from North Korea could shift the balance of power in Russia's favor. For Ukraine, this means that continued military support from Western allies is more crucial than ever. Without additional arms, air defense systems, and intelligence support, Ukraine may struggle to maintain its current position on the battlefield. Zelensky's statement that Russia is trying to involve other nations in the Ukraine conflict highlights the interconnected nature of global geopolitics. Wars and conflicts rarely happen in isolation, and this is especially true in today's world, where countries are bound by alliances, economic ties, and shared interests. In this case, Zelensky is suggesting that Russia, rather than relying solely on its own resources and forces, is seeking assistance from other countries to strengthen its position in the war. This strategy could potentially expand the conflict beyond just Russia and Ukraine, increasing the risk of other nations getting pulled in, either by supporting one side or through retaliatory actions. The involvement of North Korea, as Zelensky claims, would be an example of such a development. If North Korea is indeed sending troops or providing other forms of support to Russia, it would mark a significant escalation, indicating that other countries are now playing an active role in the war. This would further complicate the situation and might provoke responses from other nations, including Western powers that are already supporting Ukraine. Zelensky's warning also points to the possibility that Russia's alliance with North Korea could lead to the formation of a broader coalition of authoritarian regimes. These regimes, which often oppose Western democratic values and influence, might see an opportunity to strengthen ties with Russia in exchange for military or economic cooperation. If such alliances form, it could create a powerful bloc of nations that stand against Western influence, deepening global divisions and tensions. This could have far-reaching implications, not just for the Ukraine conflict, but for global stability as a whole, as it would signal the formation of new geopolitical alignments where countries are divided into camps of opposing ideologies and interests. In essence, Zelensky is warning that the longer the war continues, the greater the risk that it will become a much larger global conflict, involving many more countries, either directly through military involvement or indirectly through political and economic alliances. This interconnectedness makes it harder to contain the conflict and could ultimately lead to a more widespread international crisis.